busy. Do 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 do. Boop ba boom boom. Boom ba dum boom boom. Ba da da dum da 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 dum. Boom ba dum boom boom. Dum de dum de dum. Dum de dum dum dum. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. Where is the button? Where's the button? Oh, we're going. And we're live. There we go. Let's press the right button. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you very much for joining me. My name is John Stevenson, and I have messy hair today. That's why the light isn't on. Thank you very much for joining me at Practicalli. Today is going to be a good day. Today's going to be more of a free-form discussion, and that looks a bit strange. There we go. And so we're going to discuss, well, I'm going to discuss with myself, unless people ask me questions in the chat. We're going to look at Clojure CLI tools and talk about aliases and talk about community tools as well. I do warn you that this is completely unprepared. This is just more of a sharing of my thoughts currently at the moment. So it might not be the most structured broadcast that we do, but hopefully you'll get some enjoyment out of it. And if you're watching live, feel free to ask questions. If you're watching the recording, then feel free to talk to me via the many different channels I have for you to talk to me. Let's look at some of those now. Oh, let's just, I've forgotten how to use this now. There we go. Website, there we go. Let's do this differently. So if you want to get in touch with me, then I'm usually on Zulip chat the most. I prefer it over these other two approaches. It's got a really nice way to structure discussions as well and make things easier to find, and more importantly, things stay there forever. Well, yes, not necessarily forever, but for a long time. Slack's okay, I guess. Slack is what people are more familiar with. The only problem with this is that things do disappear after a few days. Although there is a log in there, but there's also an archive. So everything that's discussed in Practicalli you can see inside Zulip as well. So if you only really want to consume what's going on in Slack, then you can just use Zulip and just use one single app instead of having like 3 different apps open. But if you prefer Discord, then I've also got a Discord thing there as well. Oh, we got people joining. Thank you very much. And you can support me. It keeps me going. Pays for my internet connection and other things. That's very appreciative of everybody who has donated financially. I'm not actually working at the moment. If anybody wants to hire me, then get in touch. And so I've been relying on the Clojure Together funding for the last year, and so that's helped me kind of invest more time in this. There's still very many things to do. As you can see on all my books, they've all got lots of content I'd like to add, and I just need to work out how best to do that financially through 2021. Okay, people are joining. Thank you very much. Let's go to San Francisco. No, I've been there before. Let's go. I told you this was going to be quite a random day today, so apologies for that. So I did write a blog post this week. It's been a while. Oh, actually, it's been several months since I wrote one. And this is triggered from a discussion we've been having about how to use Clojure CLI tools with one of the editors. And so we'll kind of discuss kind of the use of aliases and so on as part of the general discussion around Clojure CLI tools. If you haven't come across Clojure CLI tools, then it's not totally surprising. They're relatively new in the world of Clojure. Clojure's been going since 2007, so Clojure CLI tools only came out in the last couple of years, I think. And I think the adoption is starting to grow quite quickly now, especially for new projects. There's not always benefit in converting, aligning a project to CLI unless you've got things you wish you could do differently with Leiningen. But I think all my new projects are Clojure CLI tools. It does add a nice level of flexibility, and there's some really nice community tools there as well. And if you want to get started with them, then the best place to do is just to install it and get going. If you go to the Practicalli website, if you go to Practicalli Clojure, then there is an install guide as well, which talks about these things. Oh, let's move there as well. So if you go into, there's like an overview of like using Clojure tools, CLI tools, and a quick little video that we did a while ago. And basically just shows you like the common tasks, kind of tasks you would do using any other tool for running and managing the configuration of a Clojure project. So you can run REPLs, you can download dependencies, find libraries as well, run tests, obviously, package and deploy everything up. And so these are using aliases, and I've indicated whether the alias is actually built into Clojure CLI or one that you actually add yourself. And I've collected and created some of my own aliases as well, which are all ended up into the Practicalli Clojure deps.edn repository. So there, I've lost track on here. I did count there was 30, but I think I've added some more. And so there's aliases that cover kind of REPL experience, managing projects, adding Java sources, so you can kind of, if you're doing any Java interrupt and data inspectors, so you can actually run more than just a REPL. When you're actually running the REPL, you can run additional kind of tools on there as well. There's middleware to help you run extra tools with a REPL and also connect your editors to a REPL as well. There's a whole kind of range of things. So it's very, I think it's, in terms of features, it's more or less equivalent to what Leiningen has done already. And part of that is because with Clojure CLI tools, you can just use the libraries that already exist. So you don't need to write any specific plugins for Clojure CLI tools. You can just wire up a library, wire up some code, and run that code as part of the command, or just include the library and then use that library as an optional dependency. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but because there's quite a lot. But let's go and do some examples first, just to show you. So inside the Practicalli Clojure, so this is the source. This is the meat of this repository. This is the kind of the file that you have. This is so this is the deps.edn file from Clojure deps.edn. And so I've included the source files just so it's there. So you could actually just run a REPL with this in, and it would look in the source directory, which is a common directory for most projects. And we've got things to run a REPL. And in this case, I'm not just running the very basic REPL that comes with Clojure. I can run the Rebel read line, which adds a lot more to the REPL experience. Let's get rid of that. So if, for example, if I just did Clojure, then it will run a REPL, but it's very basic, and it doesn't have any history in there as well. If I run CLJ, which is the wrapper around that, then it does add some history, so I can go back through the history of that. It's got what it calls a read line, so you can go through history of stuff. And then I can do, I can run Clojure, and I can give it extra things to do, using the new M flag. And so I can do REPL rebel. I'm just going to do rebel this time. And this will run a REPL, a terminal REPL, or a REPL with a terminal user interface. And this gives me history, but it also gives me syntax highlighting. It also gives me the LDoc, the kind of the function signatures there. So it kind of, I know what to give a particular function. So it will show me the signature there, so I know what arguments to give it. So it gives me a lot more useful features, and that's all just included by just giving an alias to the Clojure command. And it's even got a proper quit as well, which is quite nice. There we go. But what if I wanted to run a REPL, but then I sometimes wanted to, so sometimes you want to experiment in the REPL, we just want to learn about something, but then you might want to connect an editor to it as well. So I can use an alias, which is nREPL, which basically adds the connection between the REPL and an editor. So it's basically going to start a server within the REPL process that will listen to connections across the local network, across the network that's in my machine. So then I can connect an editor to that and we can start playing around. Oops, that should only have one colon there. That was my bad typing when I was just testing this out. And so this is run the REPL again, so I get a nice REPL experience, but I also get this extra piece here, which is starting an nREPL server, and it's telling me the port, and so I can go to my editor and now connect to it. So here's an editor I started earlier, and if I so what I would actually want to do, actually just go back a second, let's go back a step. I told you it wasn't very organized, this, so let's just quit out this for a second. Bye. So let's create a project first, because that's more of a normal form to do things in. Let's do it. So we can do, again, we can use another alias for that. So I can use the M alias, or there's also, so the M alias is for Clojure main, and there's a whole kind of section on the website in Clojure getting started about Clojure main, and deps.edn files as well. Oops, I think I must have closed that. So this is, yeah, so this is the main entry point that that's been used with Leiningen for ages, and it's what most people can use, and it's been around for ever, really. I think pretty much as long as I've been using Clojure, which is a long time. And you can give some basic, you can give arguments to that. There's a whole bunch of command line arguments you can pass into the main. And this is what you're doing if you're creating a Clojure app. You'd have a dash main function, and it's the main entry point into whatever program you have. And so the running the REPL works in the same way, essentially. And there are specific options you can kind of give to it as well. So if we look at yeah, so we look at the REPL readline alias, then we see we actually have this main ops section. So these are the like command line options. If we were calling Clojure on the command line, we could specify the M for the for the main namespace, and this is running rather than just running the main from Clojure itself, from the Clojure REPL. Then this is running the readline REPL main instead. So there's like a dash main function in there that it would call. And then one of the things we're going to do is when we run in the nREPL server, we actually run the nREPL main instead. So that runs the server, and then it hands over, and then we kind of invoke REPL readline after that. So therefore we get two processes, because we can only run one process. So we can, when we call Clojure mains, we run the nREPL, and then we can kind of then pass on to REPL readline and start that up. And if we look at projects, so there's some other REPLs there we can run. Those projects. So if we're going to create a new project, we can use main ops. This is the, I guess, the standard way of doing things, is specifying the main namespace, and inside this main namespace there's a main that we're going to run that will create a new project. But we can also use the X function. So the X option with Clojure. And so rather than doing the classic main Clojure M, which used to be Clojure A in earlier versions of Clojure CLI tools, basically replacing A with M, because A is just a general use of aliases, where M is specifically using aliases for Clojure main, and X is going to be using Clojure with Clojure exec. And exec does it's in the same way that Clojure main executes a specific function. Clojure exec will execute whatever function you define. So in project new, then exec function is defining what function that you actually want to call. So you're not tied to using the main function, as in dash main. You can use whatever function, you can call the function whatever you want, and you do need to specify the fully qualified namespace for this. So here we can kind of use, here we're using CLJ new -create, which is a function that is actually main eventually calls to create the project. And this allows us to also, instead of just passing in kind of random string arguments that need to be in the kind of right order, you can pass into this function a hash map with key value pairs. And that way you can be a lot more creative and a lot more descriptive in what arguments you're passing into a function as well. And it also makes it easier, because if it's a lot easier to deal with a map than a free-form kind of set of arguments that you would need to pass. Here you've got, you can just use all the normal Clojure tools to pass the hash map. And it's in the long term that makes things a lot easier, I think. So I can see a lot of tools moving towards the X approach, just because it gives a lot more flexibility. Oh, we're getting a lot of people there. If you do have any questions about what I'm talking about, please put them into the chat. So let's create a project. Sorry, no, muted. Yes, I was muted. Sorry. Where did we get to? So we created a project. So we created a project and we've run REPL. I still don't need that extra colon there. Sorry about that. Yeah, so we've run this Clojure. I'll do that again. Let's quit that. So we created a project using the X flag and the project new alias and the template and the Practicalli hacking is the name. So we've done that already. And inside the hacking project, then we got the structure. And so I'm running the REPL. I'm going to run the proper command this time because it doesn't need 2 colons. There we go. That was just a typo that my history kept on throwing back at me. And so we're running this REPL, which is qualified keyword that runs the nice REPL experience, and but also runs this nREPL server as well. And so then we can connect to that over the local network. And so we are starting a REPL on port 40,005, and that's going to listen to incoming requests from our editor. So it's the same process as when you're doing jack-in or when you're running a REPL from your editor. You're actually doing the same process here. It's kind of, this happens behind the scenes, and the nice thing is you can, if you're doing on the command line, then you can control exactly what it's doing. So you know exactly what command is being run. There's no kind of magic being injected in by your editor. And so you know exactly what's being included in there, because you can go and look at these aliases specifically. And also it just simplifies the using of those editors as well. You don't have to worry about whether they're putting the aliases in the right place or not, and you don't have to worry about conflicts between like when you're jacking in, what libraries it's injecting when it's doing that, what configuration it's adding. You can just do a simple connect. The only caveat around that is you do need to provide any libraries that the editor needs in order to connect. So with the REPL read line, we switch back to that here. Then with REPL, we're actually adding in nREPL, so we can actually start that nREPL server, and we're also adding in Cider nREPL so that Cider and Carver, and I'm not sure about Clojure, whether if Clojure needs that as well. It certainly needs nREPL to connect to it. But then those editors can just connect to these things, to this running REPL, because these are the things it's going to inject. But this time we're controlling what versions it's using and what order they're being used in as well. Okay, thank you. So we've created a new REPL, we created a new project, we've run a REPL, and this time we've run it with nREPL. So we've got the port host. So if we go to the editor, switch back to my project, which is there. So just open this project, the hacking project. And rather than doing jack in, we can do connect. So this isn't injecting anything into that process. It's not starting anything. We could also use connect to if we're going to run the REPL on a remote machine. So here I've got a joint Clojure machine. So this is a host that we set up to do some collaborative coding. So we spin up a server on our whatever was the cheapest cloud-based infrastructure. We installed Clojure and ran a REPL on there, and then we're able to connect from our editors. So some people were using Cider with Emacs, some people were using Visual Studio Code with Carver, and I think and some people were also using Vim with Clojure, and so it allows it's a good option when you want to use a remote REPL, and I think it's the only option actually if you want to run a remote REPL. But if you also want to do some collaborative coding and you don't want to tie people to a particular editor, then it's another way to kind of share that REPL very nicely. So we're just going to connect to the local host here, and it's detected for us that there's a port that's being listened to, so we can just connect to that, and then we're good to go. So I can go in here and I can go and change the code. CLI world. I could go and evaluate that as well. And if we go back to my REPL, let's see, we want to fire. Boom. Is it Practicalli hacking? And now we should be able to just do Practicalli, which it picks up. Now I've required it, it's actually picking up the namespace and also the function, so that makes it nicer to type. Arguments are optional, so there we go, and it's doing that. Did I get that? No, I don't have the history. And then I could also do things in the REPL here. REPL. Let's create a very simple function. Oops. If I can type. I'm just going to return string saying hello from the REPL. Ticky 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 ticky. There we go. Just to show that it is actually connected to each other, then I can actually just go and call that REPL. I think should be able to. Oh, tell you what. No, I did something wrong there, didn't I? Do you know what I did wrong? Do you know what I did wrong? I defined it in the user space. No. Yes, let's see. Let's go in NS. Hacking. There we go. I defined it in the wrong namespace, so obviously it doesn't know what it is. There we go. That's the right namespace. Or the namespace that I'm in here, because I'm in this Practicalli hacking. So the nice thing about Cider is it does pick up, when you're evaluating code, it does pick up the namespace you're in. So it always evaluates within the respect of the namespace that the source code is in. And now if I do hacking, oh, hello. And even the autocomplete is picking things up as well. So that makes it nice. And if we evaluate that, so that's, even though it's not in the source code, we can actually still do things as well. So you can put things, you can have like an external REPL and do things in there, which is feeding into the REPL itself, and the editor is connected to the REPL. So it's just very much highlighting that the fact that the REPL is a process in itself. If we go to the introduction in my book, really, this is kind of what I was trying to elaborate in this diagram. I'll make this a little bit bigger. So you've got the REPL process, and you can either start it from the command line or you can start it from the editor. See, the editor is a little bit easier to get going, especially if you're just using a simple project. But if you want to do more interesting things, if you want to run a remote REPL, then you can just run it on the command line. You could use the command line terminal interface to the REPL as well. There's a few extra little bits you need to do there. Although once you've got the REPL running on the command line, then you can connect to it via the editor. And the advantage of this is you can set up a very specific environment, a very specific project, very specific aliases. You run it remotely, and then it just simplifies the connection from the editor as well, because you're simply just connecting to a port on an IP address from the editor, and then you can continue programming in the editor, which is what the vast majority of people actually do. So rather than writing things directly in the REPL terminal, in the terminal REPL, you get that going, and then you can switch over to your editor and just connect. So you would put in all the definitions in here, you do in the source code, and you get all the autocomplete and all the other things that we're very used to. The advantage of doing this is that you don't have to worry about all the things that your editor is putting in when you're jacking in. So if we just do space U, I'm just going to look at the jack in. So I'm not actually going to run this, but I'm just going to look at. So here this is what Cider is doing. Let's just switch me off for a second. Oh, we're gone. So it's defining a bunch of deps using the sdeps thing there. And there's also like the middleware it's running, which is nREPL, which is the same thing we're doing in our alias. So this is kind of doing the same thing as our alias, but then if we want to add our own aliases in, we do need to check where it's putting it. I did do a PR recently to put them into the correct order. But if this changes, then it's going to change the way it could affect the aliases that you're using. So you do need to keep an eye on what your editor is actually doing when it's doing jack-in. And there's no guarantee that each of the different editors do the same thing. I think we've got, we've got Carver, which is another really good Clojure environment. And this also, when I start an nREPL, start jack-in, and I can select, this is really nice because I can select different environments. So I've got a project CLJ file and a deps.edn file as well, so it's giving me a choice. You can also define your own startup sequences as well. And if we do Clojure CLI, we can also select from the local aliases that are defined in deps.edn. So there's some of all these aliases listed here are in deps.edn. So I can select them. You can also use the user level one, but it's a bit more involved. You have to add something to the, you basically hard code them into your editor settings. So it's a little bit more tricky. So this gives you a bit of comfort, but this is also using a slightly out of date A option. They are aware of that. They are going to fix that, but I think it's essentially running the same thing, but it's also running slightly different versions of the Cider nREPL connection as well. And for simple things, this is fine, but if you want to really control it, then it's much better to actually just start your own REPL and manage your own aliases and do lots of interesting things. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that afterwards. Oh, there we go. So here, this REPL is also starting Portal, which is a very nice data inspector as well. So we start the REPL, but we also fire up the Portal browser. That's partly the aliases and partly because we're doing we're specifying the dev alias. This is a bit small. Let's make that bigger. Make that bigger. There we go. So yeah, so we're including the dev alias in here, which adds this dev path to the source and resources class paths. Ooh, some really nice features in Carver, actually. Yes, if I can get it to work with Vim, I might start using it. I've been saying that for a while. So if we look at the dev folder, we can see there's this user CLJ file, and this is a classic way of adding extra things into the REPL startup. There is a page in the Clojure, in the Practicalli Clojure book, covering some of this stuff as well. But basically we can require some libraries that they need to be dependencies, obviously. So we've included portal in the deps.edn file here. So when we include inspect portal CLJ, it's basically including an extra library. So that allows us to require that library, and then we can run that library as well. So this is basically sets up a new browser for portal, and then it sets it up as a tap target, so we can actually send tap code to it, and it basically displays the evaluation. So it's really good for browsing and navigating more interesting and complex data structures. And that's all brought to us by just using aliases. This is just putting a library on the class path. So in theory, we could also add it to the deps, but that also means it would be shipped if we package it up as an Uber jar. Then we're going to be including portal in there, and we're only really using portal at the moment for a development tool. So it'd be like including other development tools, or it'd be like including your tests. They don't need to be in the packaged Uber jar, so we keep them out of the main deps and just create a separate alias for that. Cool. Let's see, where do we get to? Okay. Boom. Then deps. Oh yeah, so we've covered this example. So in this REPL and read line, we've basically taken the same one for rebel. This is adding the extra deps. So that's the same as we did with portal. We're adding the extra library in that we need. And again, we don't need this as part of the main dependencies. We're not going to ship rebel with our applications generally, and that specifies the rebel read line as the main namespace. But with the rebel nREPL, we're adding extra libraries in that we need in order for the editors to connect. And luckily, so Carver and Cider use the same libraries, so we can just use as generic nREPL for that. And sometimes we can split these out. In this case, we're not just calling the nREPL middleware, but we're also then calling back into rebel read lines. We have to use that as a single alias in terms of design. But I've also created a middleware section. Boop. Let's see, where are we? Oh, there we go. And so you could just include middleware REPL as one of the aliases in a whole chain of aliases, because you can have more than one. Did we do that in there? Yeah. So here, this is just adding nREPL and calling it on the command line. And calling it as the main function. So if an editor doesn't need the Cider specific stuff, you can just use the nREPL. But if we need Cider specific libraries, then we can include that library in there as well as the extra deps. And we can also include refactor as well. Cider has this refactor library that's separate. I don't really use that much myself, but it can sometimes be quite useful to refactor parts of your application. So that for that you need to include the extra library, but also including that in the in this middleware as well. So these are kind of extra libraries that we're going to go through to be able to chain all this extra functionality together. And oops, and you can see that in the Cider, the same if you want to run Cider, but for Clojure script, has slightly different libraries in there. So we're putting in piggyback, which allows us to piggyback other libraries on top, and we can again, it slightly affects the kind of middleware. So there is a case of when do you actually kind of wire these things together, and when do you just create like an Uber, or more of an Uber kind of alias. So sometimes you just need to put them all together. So with inspect for reveal, I'm kind of specifically wanting to run a particular configuration. So I've created that as a separate alias, but it's kind of based off that as well. Yeah, there we go. But sometimes it is nice to split up. And an example that I did mention earlier, which we'll just jump back to, as in is what I've done the latest blog post about. So we jump back to that. So I'm not suggesting that Practicalli Clojure deps.edn is like the perfect design of all the aliases, but it does give you a kind of wide range of ways to design aliases. I think there are some very useful ones in there, but yeah, I'm always kind of reviewing them and looking for ways to make them easier to use and clearer to use. And one of the first kind of lessons I learned was about putting too much into an alias, and so there's an interesting discussion this week we had about this particular alias here. So we've got a test alias. It looks fairly harmless. Some of the issues I have with this is, well, it's test, so we're adding extra paths in, we're adding extra deps in, and we're also adding a main ops as well. So there's quite a bit going on here. And this is fine if we just want to run this as a Clojure specific test runner, because this is what it's doing. So it's adding very specific libraries in to run Clojure, which is a really good test runner. We're adding ring mock and mockery and fake kit to do some mocking. That's an awful lot of different mocking. Whether you need all of those in with each other, I'm not quite sure. I tend to just use ring mock if I'm using any kind of mocking, just because it has some very nice functions for generating requests and responses. But it's doing quite a lot, and you have to kind of wonder whether we need this every time we're doing testing or not, or whether this is just all the possible things we might need if we're doing testing. So if you're putting this in a user level thing, a user level configuration, then it might be useful to have them all in. If you put them in a project deps.edn file, then it's probably useful just to include just the libraries we actually want. And then we've got this main ops, which is running the Clojure runner. And so this is fine. So if you run this on the command line, it'll run the Clojure runner and bring back the results of running the tests. And it's putting out the test directory on the class path so that Clojure can find them. But if we try and just use this, so if we run this with Cider has its own built-in test runner. So we're actually adding in at least these three libraries that we don't actually need. and we're not going to use them because Cider's got its own test runner. And if we try to run Clojure in Cider, then where would the output go? And also, more importantly, it potentially is going to cause conflict because we're specifying a main ops, but then when Cider, if we do Cider jack-in with this alias, then we've got a conflict between the two. So I tend to try and keep out, if we're going to use an alias with like a process like jack-in, then we don't want to include a main ops because we've already got one from Cider or from our editor. Or we disable what the editor is doing. It is possible to disable everything in Cider to not inject things into when you're doing jack-in. However, you may as well just use like Cider Connect instead and just run your project REPL on the command line, and that way you know for definite what's actually going into it, and you don't have to worry about conflicting main ops because the main ops that you use are the ones that are going to be included. And when you do a let's just come out of this REPL quit. That's the wrong tab. There we go. So if you do Clojure, yeah, there we go. I can, instead of just doing one single alias, I can also put in, let's do like an env dev and then, oops, wrong one. Env test. And then this will load in. It will basically merge all the dependencies and all the paths from each of these aliases to form one single configuration. But if these first two aliases also have main ops, they'll be ignored. So M will only run the main ops from the last thing. So if we were just running, I don't think this would work because REPL's a bit interesting. But if we did middleware slash, I've got one specifically for Cider CLJ, that would make sure that the main ops, so the main namespace that's called, that's used by Clojure, is the one that's at the end. So this would mean that it would always run the REPL and provide the nREPL connection, the nREPL server, so that Cider and Carver and Clojure can connect to that. So we go back to Practicalli Clojure. See if there's any data inspectors. Boom. Oh, that doesn't there. Trying to find an example here. We've got. Oh yeah, I guess this one's close. So this one is for Cognitect Rebel. And so we want to make sure that we're using this middleware nREPL, which is kind of doing the same thing that I was doing with REPL readline. It's basically setting up a REPL process that's going to send all the evaluations to the Cognitect Rebel tool, which is a nice visual tool for helping you navigate the results of your evaluations. And we're in this time we're including. I've just got a lib that's just including Cider nREPL. Although I could just use the middleware Cider CLJ because it wouldn't use the main ops from there. They'd just be ignored. But just for to make the configuration simple, I'm just using the library here. And then we're going to inspect REPL, which adds the REPL libraries, and then we call middleware nREPL last, because that does the magic to wire everything up in there as well. Do I have any examples of? No, I don't. Oh yeah, there we go. Boom. There are other examples here where I've used no, where's it? Middleware CLJ. Yeah, that's the one. Where have you got? I was looking to see if I've got any examples of where I've used this. Apart from itself, I don't think I have. No. Okay. I'll put that in the notes if I find one. But yeah, so essentially it's nice to be able to break things out, but it's not always possible. But going back to the blog posts, then there are some obvious ones where you should really break things out. Yeah, we were just discussing this, weren't we? Yes, there we go. So this has got a lot of things going on, and that could be fine for just running the Clojure test runner, but then we would call the alias a more specific name, because test could be doing anything, and in this case it's doing quite a bit. So what did we mean to do with this alias? So if we call this even if we call this test runner, then it'd be a lot clearer that we're trying to use this as a test runner, and we'd be less likely to just use it to include just the test path, which you do need to do in Cider. It does need to be aware that there's a test path in order to be able to run its own test runner. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to find the tests. It wouldn't be able to compile the tests to be able to find them inside the running process. So a better design would be to just split them out. So if you are always using these libraries, or if you are using those in the particular project, then yeah, include the libraries that you need and the paths you need, and define that as a very specific alias. So defining the environment in which you want your tests to run, and then you can define separate aliases for test runners, because there are more than one. So Clojure and Cognitect Labs are both really good test runners, or you might want to use the built-in test runner like in Cider. So that way you wouldn't actually include a test runner, you just include the test env. And because there's no main ops, you can use this very comfortably with Cider jacking. It's not going to cause any issues, because all we're doing is just adding in extra dependencies and paths. And so if you were going to run Clojure now, then you would run Clojure env tests, followed by test runner Clojure. And that's a very clear kind of specific command that you can understand what it's doing. And there's no ambiguity about which ops it's running, because it's going to run that on the command line. Clojure and Cognitect Labs are designed to be test runners that run on the command line, because they go and just read all the files in from your project and return the results on the command line too. Yeah, so here we go. We get the Clojure -m for specifying the ops that are going to run with Clojure main, and we get mdev, env test, and test runner. Yes, it is a bit more typing, but then you have a command line that is very clear and very specific on what it's doing. And so when you come back to this project, you can see exactly what it's doing. And it also means that things like mdev are reusable across all your projects, but also Clojure is reusable as well. And you can swap this out and put test runner in very easily as well. So if you find there's a bug with one of the test runners, or you want to make sure that the test runner is running everything well or efficiently, then you can compare test runners as well just by swapping in the different alias for this. And that saves editing files and so on. So I put these test runners into the user level configuration. So they are examples in Practicalli Clojure.deps.edn. So there's a whole range of test Clojure for CLJS. So I tend not to put CLJ on things unless I kind of want to make an absolute distinction. So it's usually, if it's got nothing in, it's for for Clojure, CLJS specific. And then you can also like combine these as well. If you want JUnit reporting with Clojure, then you can just include that as an extra alias as well. And so therefore it means you don't have to add these configurations to your project deps.edn. It will make the project deps.edn a lot simpler because you can use the aliases that are in your user-wide things. So it's like having git ignores. There's some git ignores you have specifically for your editor, for your own environment, that you just include in your git ignore global, hopefully. And this is a kind of a global configuration for all your projects. Oh, I forgot to put webcam back on. So hopefully that makes sense. Oh, we're at time already. I hope my randomness wasn't too random this time. This is just completely off the cuff, so hopefully I made some sense in there. If you want to try my deps.edn, if you're not doing that already, you do need 1.10.1.697 or later. I think we're up to 7 something. But this is when we changed over from, this is when the M flag and the X flag were introduced proper. So that's the kind of minimum version. And you can put them into wherever your user level configuration goes. It's usually deps.edn. But I think there's also, yeah, oh, I should have put that in here. Yes, there we go. Some people do have this config home set differently. I think on some Debian systems it's set differently. So sometimes your config might be under, for example, home.config.clojure, which I think actually is a little bit tidier. I might actually change that myself. As otherwise, you just basically have .clojure directory in the root of your home directory. And this project just adds this README, this configuration for REPL readline there as well. This just makes it a kind of a nice light theme. And there's a change log which just basically shows you the monthly updates. Oh yes, I've gone dark. I've followed the trend of putting a dark background to my GitHub. I'm not sure if this is actually a good idea or not. But this changelog shows you which versions I'm updating. I'm usually updating these at least once a month, and just so you can see which version's on. I'm doing some testing as much as I can. When I'm doing these, there was a bit of an issue at one point where we were stuck on a particular version of Clojure. But this gives you an idea about how these aliases are evolving as well. I do discuss these in the chat channels. If there are any aliases missing, let me know. There's also some experiment or alpha. Oh, I can't spell anymore. Yeah, there we go. So there's a few experimental ones as well, so which you may want to try, but there's no guarantee that they're going to work. I've also included some, if you've got some interesting repository setup as well, there's also some guides on how to set up slightly different. If you've got something more than other than Maven Central and Clojures, then there's some, like for example, there's some mirrors, and also kind of if you have your own kind of business area, if you have your own Nexus or Artifactory setup as well, there's some examples in the deps.edn file for that. Alrighty, well, there aren't any questions, so, and people are still here, so you obviously found that fairly useful. So thank you very much for watching. I appreciate this was not very structured. You just experienced all the thoughts in my brain this morning. So I'm going to leave it there, and please feel free to get in touch with me, the usual channels, whichever it takes your fancy. I do recommend Zulip because it's really nice. And also, if you want to do some data science with Clojure, then that's where all the people doing data science with Clojure tend to hang out. There's a lot of discussions there, specifically just on Zulip. They aren't anywhere else. So that's quite nice. If you are interested, there's also this Clojure. I'll just do a quick plug for Clojure community. So there's a lot of really interesting things here. There's like at the moment we're just doing regular meetings at the weekends. You don't need to be having experience with data science. You just need to be keen on learning it. We are all kind of helping each other to learn stuff. So there's a lot of meetings going on. It's a very friendly community, so feel free to get involved. We're doing we're converting or trying to taking inspiration from the Python Data Scientist Handbook to see what are the tools and libraries and other useful things we can use to do data science using Clojure. Okay, I'm definitely going to go now because I think I haven't had breakfast. So thank you very much for watching, and I will see you. Actually, this is going to be the last. I think this is going to be the last scheduled live broadcast for 2020. So I appreciate everybody who's watched all the videos. They are all recorded, so you can go back and watch them. I think we've got, I didn't quite get up to 100 study group sessions over the last 2 years, but we're close. So something to celebrate in the new year. And thanks to everybody who's subscribed as well. It's very much appreciated. I think we're almost up to 1,000 subscribers, so maybe I do a bit more promotion. I'll get up to 1,000 subscribers. That'd be quite nice for the new year. Yeah, if you've got any ideas about what you'd like me to cover, there is a lot of content that I'd like to do. It's just prioritizing and sitting down and getting it done. So yes. So I hope you have a wonderful rest of December. Get a chance to relax and unwind from the craziness of this year. And I will hopefully see you in the new year. Thank you very much. Goodbye.